Welcome to the Healing Healthcare Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley O'Connor. I'm a registered nurse turned holistic health coach and personal trainer for my fellow nurses and healthcare workers on a mission to help you feel your best in a world that's telling you to put yourself last. This is a space where nurses can come together to understand that their identity extends beyond the humans that they care for, where the hardest workers in the room can have honest and authentic conversations about what is holding them back and the changes needed to move forward. I am here to help you fit nutrition, fitness, and self-care into a life built around 12-hour shifts. Each week, we will spend time diving into the research, searching for evidence-based strategies, connecting with experts, and asking the big questions so that we can build a life we love in and outside of the hospital. If you are ready to step into the new era of nursing and help me heal healthcare, then you are in the right place. Let's dive in. I think sometimes as a podcast host, you feel like you have to have everything together. Like, I'm hosting a podcast called Healing Healthcare, and so I must be healed. And I think we do this to ourselves a lot just as humans. If we think that we're in a role that should look a certain way or act a certain way and we are acting differently, then we feel like we aren't doing a good job or we're out of place or we're a hypocrite. Like nurses, if you are struggling with your health, I think there's so many nurses who feel like they're hypocrites because they work in healthcare. And maybe you feel like you want to lose a little bit of weight. Maybe you don't have the perfect gym routine. Maybe you aren't eating all of the foods that you're recommending to your patients. Like, it's so easy to feel like a hypocrite. And sometimes I feel that way in this role too. Hosting a podcast called Healing Healthcare, and this now being my second podcast, it feels at times like I am not perfect enough for this. To be honest, I had a completely different podcast topic that I was going to talk about as I sat down, like right now, in real time. I wanted to talk about time management, and we will. I think probably next week we'll talk about time management. But I sat down to record, and I didn't feel like I was in the place to talk about time management because I didn't feel like I deserved to. And so I kind of want to just live unpack this because I know whenever I feel like I'm the only one that feels a certain way, I know that there are others. I know that I'm not the only one because I can't be the only one in this giant world. And I can't be the only nurse who has changed jobs and is trying entrepreneurship or has gone into an outpatient role or is doing something non-traditional or whatever it is that your situation looks like. I can't be the only nurse who feels like they don't deserve to be here or that they aren't good enough or that they're not smart enough or are just afraid, I guess. And I'm not even going to do a good job explaining this feeling probably, but maybe you relate. I've been having this feeling recently because I'm in a place now. We moved to Denver, and Denver is significantly more expensive than Tucson was, and we knew this moving here. It wasn't a surprise. And the plan has always been for me to pick up some part-time work once we moved here because our bills would be higher, and we wanted to kind of cushion our financial situation so that we could live the same lifestyle that we have because we enjoy a very flexible lifestyle, and that would change if we just kind of kept our financial situation with me working full-time as an entrepreneur in my coaching business and my husband working full-time in corporate industry. And so now I have found a couple of part-time positions that are non-nursing related just to help supplement our income. And that has been an interesting transition. It sort of has felt a little bit like waving a white flag. That is a very dramatic way to say this, but it's felt a little like, oh my God, I failed, or that I'm not good enough and therefore I need part-time work. And I want to just preface that if I was talking to literally anyone else, that is completely okay. And also that is a sign of maturity and also realizing what's going to be most helpful for your family and also recognizing seasons of entrepreneurship and seasons of building a business where there are fluctuations, like there is no steady specific income that I have as a coach. It can go up and down each month, and that level of change means that it changes how we budget each month. And so having some stability built in there with some part-time work can be helpful. Like, I just want to acknowledge the logical piece here, but my brain is really good at the illogical in a lot of ways. It's really good at telling these elaborate stories about what things mean in my life. And you probably do something similar as a nurse. Maybe in your role while you're in the hospital, you make a small error or forget something small, and you probably can make up a whole story about what that means about your capability as a nurse. I did this all the time, at least as a nurse with anxiety. I could, just leave, the aspirin on the Pyxis and, oops, I got to go back and grab that. And that would mean something about how organized I was as a nurse, or my capability, or my safety, or whatever it was. I could make these huge stories about small instances in my life. And I'm doing the same thing right now. And honestly, I don't even know exactly why I'm talking about this today, but sometimes I just feel like I have to hit record and talk, and that it hits home for one person. And I usually hear from that person, and it makes it all make sense. In the moment, I'm like, oh my God, this is a complete tangent and nobody's going to listen to this because I'm telling stories in my head. But there's one person who needs to know that they aren't the only ones who are thinking about these things, who can tell these stories, who can kind of get caught up in their anxiety and lose sight of their ability as a human and as a nurse. And that's me right now. Also, very recently, I've been looking at nursing positions again, and that has felt weird. It's felt kind of all over the place. I've gone through kind of a roller coaster of emotions just with the idea of looking at nursing positions again, because I had a conversation recently with a person who was a healthcare provider and is now retired, and was chatting with them and just kind of reflecting on healthcare. And sometimes when I do that, I can get this really strong nostalgic feeling. I can get this feeling of like, I miss healthcare and I miss nursing and I miss that impact. And I also just kind of reminisce about the good parts and the things I learned and how I grew. And it's really easy to start to feel like, oh my God, I made a mistake by pivoting and transitioning and trying to build a business in a new way as a nurse, even though at my core, I've known that this has always been the right choice, this path that I've taken. And that doesn't mean I can't go back and change my mind and try nursing again. That doesn't mean that all of this was the wrong choice or was a mistake. It simply means that this is just a different chapter, a different season where maybe this makes more sense, or maybe I needed a certain amount of time away and then to try it again. Like, that's okay if that happens. But even just looking at positions again and roles again has felt both enticing and triggering, because I'm looking at all these roles and I'm choosing non-traditional roles like IV nursing and infusion clinics and just clinics in general, or integrative clinics or ketamine infusion centers. I'm looking at all these different roles in different ways that I could use my nursing license and still kind of regain some of the skills that have gotten really rusty in being away from the bedside, but also won't be going back to the bedside, like bedside nursing in a hospital, because that doesn't feel right for me. But doing that feels exciting. It feels like there's some nostalgia there and like, oh, this could be fun. Like maybe I could still find a position in nursing that would feel right, but also extremely triggering because I've been away and I have this story that I'm telling in my head. This is my anxiety speaking, that I don't have the skill anymore and that I'm not going to pick it up and that I won't pick it up fast enough and I'm not smart enough and maybe I'm not strong enough or good enough for this. And maybe that's why it didn't work out. There's so many stories that I can tell, and it's really hard to tell whether they're true or not. That's the hard part about anxiety. And I know, like, I'm coming at this from being a nurse who's an entrepreneur and running a business, and that in itself is terrifying and extremely challenging and yet extraordinarily rewarding all of the time. But you as a nurse may be working at the bedside, or maybe you're in a clinic, or maybe you've just transitioned into a new role, whatever it is. Maybe you're a nursing student and you're entering the profession and feeling like you don't belong. Like whatever phase that you are in this journey, you can feel this way too. And maybe it's that you're applying for jobs that feel so out of reach and you're so afraid that you're never going to be good enough for that role. Or maybe you're interested in something like entrepreneurship and you just don't feel like you have any skill at all. Like, cause that's the story that your anxiety is telling you. Maybe you feel similar. And that's why I'm saying any of this. My intention for this podcast, when I looked at it from a very glorified perspective, was that each episode would just be research and tactics, and you could pull all of this stuff away that you could immediately apply into your life. And that will be a lot of these episodes, but also sometimes I never want this to become another thing that I feel like I have to do. I never want this to become a chore, and it can't always be tactics. It can't always be a 5-step process to master a skill. Sometimes it needs to be, hey, we're humans, and sometimes that's really hard, and sometimes it's really scary. And I think social media and the internet and podcasts and all of these things that we consume in general trick our brains into believing that other people have figured it out, that other people have it together, that other people have what we don't, that they're smarter and better, and they manage their time better. Like today's episode was supposed to be about time management, and I'm like, I'm not managing my time at this moment, so how can I talk about that? But we think and are often shown these images and videos and reels and all this content about how other people have figured it out and how other people have mastered X, Y, or Z. And so then we come to this conclusion that there's something wrong with us. When in reality, most people, if you talk to them at a human level, and if they were honest, if we were all honest with each other, most people don't know exactly what they're doing. Most people are still trying to figure it out. Most people have areas of their life that they don't feel competent in or confident in, that they don't feel like they're good at, that they're still working on. Like nobody has it figured out. Not completely, not truly. And even the people who are documenting the good stuff, they have bad stuff. They do. And recently, I've just felt really tired of the polished and of the facade and the image that so many of us feel like we have to project out into the world to tell everyone that we have it together, or to try and convince people that our life is perfect or that it looks a certain way. I'm really tired of it. Social media, all of the things that I've consumed in the past, it's felt really phony lately. And maybe that's just like a phase. I don't know. Maybe this is the way that the social media wave is going towards more authenticity, but it's not even authenticity, because I think that word has been thrown around for a long time, and that everyone's trying to be authentic, but we're faking it. Like we are pretending to be authentic in the way that we think people want from us, not true authenticity, because we show the good stuff, or we show us crying from something that happened in the past, but how we got through it. Like we only show the rainbow at the end. We only show the light at the end of the tunnel. We don't show what it feels like to be in the tunnel and not see a way out. I just want something real. I want true connection. That's the only reason I ever started social media in general. Like I was late to the game. I never wanted social media to be a big part of my life, at least when I was younger. I kept the flip phone and real books for so long because I didn't want to get a smartphone or social media or a Kindle or any of these things. I was very against it at the time. And it's hilarious to think back, only because now I've built an entire business now on social media that relies on social media. But I only started it because I just wanted to connect more. I wanted more people to find the podcast. I wanted to be able to have a conversation that isn't possible just on a podcast platform. Like, you guys can't have a conversation with me here on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening. Like, that's just not built in. And so starting an Instagram page was the best way that I knew to be able to have conversations. And that has been the most rewarding part of building a business on social media, is simply that people at times will reach out to me and say, this podcast hit home, or that post that you made felt really connected for me, or thank you for saying this out loud, or putting into words what I couldn't, or I relate to you so much, or this made me laugh, it put a smile on my face. Like, those are the things that I want. And I'm not saying this as a person who's just trying to get more engagement out of you. That's the other thing that's been bothering me. I don't know how we got on a tangent about social media, but here we are about social media, is that the connections can often feel extremely transactional. I hope that if you ever reach out to me now or in the future, whenever you're listening to this or any other podcast, I hope that when you slide into my DMs and say hi and mention a podcast or something, that you never feel like you are a transaction to me. Because you're not. But I know so many creators, so many influencers who I will message or ask a question to or just try and engage with, who it immediately becomes a transaction. And it is extraordinarily clear that the only value that I have to you is if I spend money with you. And of course, I would love to work with you and I would love to support you, and that might involve money, but it doesn't have to. I just never want this to be a transactional relationship, because those are some of the ones that have hurt me the most. When I think I have something more than I do, when I feel like I have a real connection with a creator, and then I realize that the only value I have to them is if I spend money. And I realize where that comes from, and I understand that these creators can't have relationships with everyone that reaches out to them, especially as you grow. I get it, but I never want that to be my reality. And that's I guess part of my desire for something different on social media and on podcasts and all of these spaces. So yeah, I guess you're just going to see this sometimes on the podcast. You're going to see episodes where I'm just talking to you about what's going on in my brain, because I think we need more people saying that part out loud, so that you don't listen to this podcast and think, oh my God, Ashley has it all together. It's comical to me to even say out loud, because that's so far from the truth. I am just someone who honestly tried multiple careers. I started in psychology. You've listened to the first episode where I talk about my background, but I started with one career and it didn't work out and it felt unaligned. And so I went into a new one. I started nursing, and I was so certain that it was going to be everything that I thought it was, that it was going to be the perfect career, and it wasn't. And that journey was terrifying. And so I decided to try to build something myself and try certifications and connect with people. And now I have to learn how to market on social media and these sorts of things. And I feel very privileged that I can even attempt entrepreneurship. But it doesn't mean that I figured it out. It doesn't mean that I'm sitting here recording this podcast in a, 5-story mansion. I don't even think that exists, but in a mansion with all my bills paid and everything's perfect. And I go on vacations to Bali whenever I want. Like, that's not my reality either. I still struggle. I have to fight for this. And sometimes I doubt myself. A lot of times I doubt myself, just like I doubted myself before. It's never rainbows and butterflies. It just isn't, because that's not what life is. And I think we all believe that that's what life's supposed to be. And so when ours doesn't feel like that, we think that we're doing it wrong. And I think that's how I felt. I felt like I've been doing it wrong. I've even felt like I've been doing entrepreneurship wrong, because all I see are other coaches and other trainers and nurse coaches and all these people who I follow to train the algorithm, right? I'm seeing their content and they seem to know what they're doing. I see them all, like, here's the vacation I went on, and here's how I made $10,000 this month, and here's how I made 6 figures in 6 months, and here's how you can too. And I stopped, going into my nursing career because I, was making more money once I started this business or whatever. That's not true for me. This has been walking through mud. Sometimes it works, and sometimes I feel like I'm failing miserably. And I want you to know that, because what you see sometimes on social media doesn't reflect that. And the people you're following, same thing. Even the nurses that you're following who you think have all of the knowledge in the world, they doubt themselves too. They feel like they're not knowledgeable enough in some type of area. Like they have that issue as well. Or maybe they're so dedicated to their work that they struggle at home, or that their health is in the toilet. Like we don't see all the sides of what someone is going through on any of these platforms because it's just not what's pushed out. The algorithm doesn't favor the reality of life. It favors the heavily polished side or the highly controversial side, which is why you're pushed so much rage content or ridiculous theories or dangerous things, because the controversial stuff works better. And so I've known that there are a million ways that I could grow. I could just start posting really controversial videos, or I could start posting rage content and getting nurses fired up, and maybe then they'd follow. I could do all of that stuff, but I don't want to. That's not the business that I ever intended to build. And the thing I know is that this role, being a coach for nurses, when I get on a call, talk to a nurse, help her work through whatever she needs to work through, build a plan or a system that's going to work for her life, work through a hurdle or an obstacle that they faced, maybe help them organize their schedule so they have more time to be with their family, whatever it is, that is when I feel right. So that's why I'm still here, because it hasn't worked out perfectly every time. It's not butterflies and rainbows. Sometimes I still feel like a complete idiot who made a mistake, who gave up a career that looks really good on paper for something that is filled with uncertainty and risk and honestly doesn't make sense to most people when I explain it to them. I traded that, but I know that that was the right trade because of the impact that I get to make and the feeling that I have when I just get to connect with another nurse who leaves our calls just feeling a little bit better. So why am I saying this? It's a great question. Next week, we're going to talk about time management because I have a really great episode laid out where we're going to talk about time management techniques that you can use at work as a nurse, but also at home to manage and better enjoy your life outside of the hospital. We're going to talk about that next week. But this has been what's on my mind. And this episode is as all over the place as my thought process is lately. I know that there are a lot of you who are just finishing out your last semester, or maybe you just graduated recently. This is the season where we have transitions happening in nursing school, and you may be transitioning to practice and entering that new phase, or you've just maybe made a job transition, whatever. For those of you who are in a transition phase, you go through a lot of emotions. And I don't think we talk about those parts of human experience enough. So I really just hit record and started talking. And so I hope this hit home for you. I hope that it just made you realize that you are not the only one who feels like you don't know what you're doing sometimes, or who's terrified that you're not going to be good enough at something, or that you forgot all your skills, or that somebody's going to judge you or yell at you or tell you that you're not good enough or that you're not smart enough. I know that feeling. If you're finishing out nursing school, you just might feel like you're not good enough for this job altogether, like you're never going to pass the NCLEX or get the job, or that somebody's going to find out that you're not as smart as they thought you were, or whatever. I know those feelings. I still have them now. It's part of the human experience, but it gets better. There are days where you might feel like this, but there are other days where you're going to feel confident and that you're going to feel like you're going to know that you are good enough, because I already know that. And I know that about myself at a really deep level. It's just buried under anxiety. And maybe that's true for you too. I encourage you to dig past that anxiety a little and think about all of the evidence that you have about how capable that you are, because you have to be. You wouldn't have made it here. Wherever you are right now, you wouldn't have made it if you weren't capable. Healing healthcare means that we have to talk about this part too. I thought that this podcast would just be perfectly polished and that we would just talk about research and how to get better every day or whatever, but I realized that that's not what's going to happen. It's going to happen sometimes, but we also have to talk about anxiety and depression, imposter syndrome, fear, self-doubt, lack of confidence. Because I think what we can forget sometimes as nurses, as healthcare workers, is that we are human too. And that we don't just need to talk about time management tips or the best way to pack for a 12-hour shift or COVID or prioritization or critical thinking or cardiac disease. Like, we don't always have to talk about how to be a better nurse. We also have to talk about how to heal as a human, because that will make us a better nurse. How to take care of ourselves as people. That is what makes us a good nurse. Honestly, more than you ever will be if I just taught you about how to insert an IV better. I will teach you those things too. But I hope that you keep coming back to this podcast because you trust me and that you know that I want to help in all of the phases of life, that I've walked through the mud too, and that I don't have it all figured out, and that I'm a safe place. That is all I want. And that's not the only reason I'm talking about this. I'm not saying that I struggle just so that you feel safe with me. That's not an ulterior motive. It's honestly because after having recorded this podcast for 26 minutes, I feel better now because I got to talk through it with you. And so I hope you get to feel better as you finish this episode because you got to talk through this with me. That's all I want. So I love you guys. I'm rooting for you. You are so much more capable and more intelligent and more than enough than you think that you are. And I hope you know that I know that at an extremely deep level, even if we've never met. And if we haven't, please come on over to Instagram at Health Coach for Nurses and just say hi. Say that you listened to this episode or whether something hit home for you. Let me know, because then I get to talk to you. And then we can build a real connection, because you are not a transaction for me. You are never just a follower. You are never just a listener. You're never just another nurse or another sales opportunity. You are a possible friend and another nurse who I care about. You're a human to me, always. And you matter. So this was all over the place, but I appreciate each and every one of you who listened till the end. I'll see you in our next episode. I promise we will actually talk about time management because I've got some really good things for you guys to take and use in your life. But sometimes you're going to get episodes like these where I'm just flying off the handle. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope you got exactly what you needed from today's episode. If it resonated with you, it would mean so much if you would share it with a fellow healthcare worker who might love it too. That way we can continue to grow our community of like-minded nurses and healthcare workers who are ready to heal healthcare from the ground up. And make sure you're following over on Instagram at Health Coach for Nurses for even more support and value. I've got your back. I am rooting for you, and I will see you in the next episode.